Well, this presentation has been prepared by Emilienne and I, but in order to be more adequate for the format, I will present on behalf of the two of us. Okay. So the idea with this presentation is to give an overview of what is the framework of this CALOHEA initiative. What does this project means for the academic community? So what we prepare, it's really a summary of the objectives and the main aspects that we developed during these 2 years in this CALOHEA project. I think that the first aspect to be considered is what was the original objective of this initiative. As our host introduced, saying that we have been working for the last 5 years, is because this CALOHEA project is the continuation of another initiative developed in Southeast Asia, that is tuning Southeast Asia. So this continuation more focalized, more completely linked to the learning outcomes. It's the result of a very broad discussions with the different countries involved in the project in relation to this recognition and internationalization angle of CALOHEA in particular. That's why when we proposed this project that is supported by the European Commission, our idea is to try to contribute to this regional discussion in terms of the internationalization of the higher education institutions, developing a series of mechanisms, interrelated mechanisms and measures, in order to improve the recognition of programs, the recognition partially and full of full programs, in particular in Southeast Asia. So the format of the project is an Erasmus Plus capacity building project, which involves universities from Southeast Asia and from Europe. And the project is, as you can see here, is coordinated by the University of Groningen in the Netherlands and co-coordinated by UN, that it's our best partner and host in many of our meetings also here in Thailand. So at the end, we have 12 countries involved, 7 in Southeast Asia and 5 countries in Europe, and 27 in total universities, some organizations beside these universities, which discuss and develop these mechanisms for recognition, trying to promote internationalization of higher education institutions. So we work, and as you have seen in the program, and as we are going to discuss in particular in the next sessions, around 3 subject areas. So the project and this discussion about internationalization, about recognition mechanisms, are linked to 3 subject areas: civil engineering, teacher education, and medicine. So these are the three main areas involved in our discussion and the heart of the project. In particular for Thailand, because as we have 27 institutions, 23 in particular from Southeast Asia, split it in the seven countries involved. For Thailand, we have 3 higher education institutions involved in these subject areas. In civil engineering, medicine, and teacher education, these are our partners, and they are the leaders for the discussion, in particular for teacher education and civil engineering tomorrow in the workshops. what are the results that we are trying to promote at the end of the projects through our discussions? We propose 3 key recognition mechanisms to be developed in order to enhance this internationalization and recognition. The first one is the creation and the use of regional subject-specific qualification and assessment reference frameworks, a very long title, that will allow more comparability of our institutional degree programs profiles. Then I will try to specify each of these recognition mechanisms in the next slides, but we have this first outcome that is almost finalized, and the idea of this dissemination meeting is to try to share with the academics, with the students, with different stakeholders in Thailand these results in order to receive some kind of feedback and to enrich, as I mentioned in my launching speech, to enrich these results. So we have one recognition mechanism for internationalization, that is this regional subject-specific qualification framework. There is a second recognition mechanism that is linked to the credits and to the workload culture. And here the idea is to try to install at the Southeast Asia region this culture of student workload measurement as part of the curriculum design process. So when we are trying to readapt or reform or to create a curriculum, this aspect to take into consideration the student workload is critical. So we have this second recognition mechanism line or angle, that is the culture of a student workload. And the third is the implementation of authentic assessment of international and comparable learning outcomes in the degree programs. Probably this is the third of these 3 recognition mechanisms, is probably the less developed in terms of these 2 years of discussions. So we are now in the process of trying to complete this third recognition mechanism, but it's still under discussion. So probably in terms of the workshop for tomorrow, it's probably where you will find less results. We have some results, but it's under construction. And at the end, the idea is to achieve an Asian network of champions of internationalization who will be able to use, to implement, to share, to multiply these recognition mechanisms in other institutions, in other subject areas beyond these 3 that we are working in CALOHEA. In relation to the first recognition mechanism, that is the qualification, the subject-specific qualification framework, probably it's relevant because it's part of our key elements in CALOHEA, and all of my colleagues who are here representing different institutions in the project know very well the difference of this specific subject qualification framework, but there are other terminology in relation to this recognition elements in for the academic language that are more used. And this, first of all, what is a qualification framework? What is the importance of this element in recognition, transparency, comparability at global level? So here is a typical definition of what is a qualification framework as a structure that's give us the opportunity to classify, to organize different qualifications in a geographical area. And of course, this must be in dialogue and completely interrelated with the national qualification frameworks. In many countries in this region, but all over the world, there are different developments of national qualification frameworks that again organize all the qualification that can be obtained in a particular country, and gives the opportunity to link one level with another in terms of what a qualification means in general in terms of knowledge, skills, and competence. So this development of national qualification frameworks must be completely linked to the development of this subject-specific qualification framework that we are trying to promote from CALOHEA. And of course, the regional qualification reference framework, and here we have one example from Asia with the Asian qualification reference framework that probably many of you knows, but also as this project link institutions from Southeast Asia and Europe. In Europe, we have our reference with the EQF, the European Qualification Framework. So we have different developments in terms of qualification framework. We have national qualification frameworks, we have regional qualification frameworks, but we are going to propose in CALOHEA what this big group of 23 universities in Southeast Asia develop is a subject-specific qualification framework for each of these 3 subject areas involved in the project. So all the teams involved in CALOHEA develop one subject-specific qualification framework for civil engineering, one qualification framework for medicine, and one qualification framework for teacher education. And the structure that we propose for this, to try to agree on and to try to share with this broad academic community in the region is this picture that you can see in the slide. It's a framework that is organized in terms of dimensions and subdimensions with 3 key elements for each of these dimensions and subdimensions proposed, that are described in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills, and in terms of responsibilities. So the work that all these groups have done during these 2 years is to try to identify different dimensions in civil engineering, different dimensions in teacher education, different dimension in medicine for the region. And this dimension indicates a key element which defines the subject area. Of course, and we will see in the presentation, in particular for teacher education, that is, it will be developed after this presentation. Each subject area defines a number of dimensions and a number of subdimensions. Here, the idea is that these key elements represented by the dimension can be also specified in some subdimensions, which give a greater diversity and comparability of this graduate profile across the different countries and institutions. And of course, that the construction that is behind these dimension and subdimensions are a collective, is part of this collective discussion, trying to integrate the different national perspectives from these different subject areas in a common and general agreement of what medicine represents for the region and for these 7 countries involved, what civil engineering represents for the region and the different institutions in discussing in CALOHEA, and the same from medicine. So at the end, we have these results that will be part of the discussions and part of this enrichment process for tomorrow, where in particular in workshop number 1 for recognition mechanism number 1, where we will explain for teacher education and for civil engineering what are these agreements. And here the voices of other colleagues will be relevant in order to validate and to enhance this agreement. But the idea that is behind this agreement is that when we define which are the dimensions, and in particular the dimension and some of the sub-dimensions that represent this subject-specific regional qualification framework, is that all the institutions can be part of this final picture. But in particular, some of them are more focused in one or two or more sub-dimensions than others, but at least all of them has these dimensions included in what is expected for a degree profile in terms of civil engineering, teacher education, or medicine. In terms of the key descriptors for each of these key dimension and sub-dimension must be described in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills, and in terms of responsibilities. And here we have in this slide, which are the main definition that we share with the members of the CALOHEA project of what we, how we consider a knowledge descriptor, how we consider a skill descriptor, or responsibility descriptor, or competence descriptor. So here we have the different definitions. In terms of knowledge descriptors, are the theoretical or the factual knowledge a graduate is expected to develop in a particular degree program. The skills descriptors refer to the cognitive skills and the practical skills that a graduate is expected to develop during this particular program. And finally, the responsibility descriptors refers to a particular task that the profession or the society expect a graduate to be able to perform after this process of this learning process that is behind a concrete program. So each of the groups, each of these three subject areas went through this discussion, defining the key dimension, defining a number of sub-dimensions, and for each of them, knowledge descriptors, skills descriptors, and responsibility descriptors. So at the end, what we have after these 2 years of discussions is it's this final picture of this table in blue that is in dialogue with in particular with the Asian Regional Qualification Framework, level 6, that it's part of the Southeast Asia framework, but of course the different national qualification frameworks, and in some cases some subject-specific reference or regulation documents at national levels in relation to this profession in this particular subject area. So the result, the idea is that must be completely aligned with the regional and the national regulation in each of the 7 countries. So what we are going to share during these 2 days is part of this agreement and developments. And of course, this proposal of this recognition mechanism number 1, this subject-specific regional qualification framework for civil engineering, medicine, and teacher education, has been validated and consulted with different stakeholders from the different universities involved in CALOHEA. So during these 2 years, the universities discussing in teacher education, for example, consult other academics, not only those who were involved in CALOHEA, consulted students, consulted graduates employers in terms of their perspective of these first agreements in terms of the dimension, subdimension, and the key descriptors for each of these elements, which are at the end the result of the subject-specific qualification framework. So this result that is already finished, and we are now trying to enrich with all of you. From the point of view of CALOHEA project, allowed us to clearly see which key dimension must be addressed by each program in the subject area. So it would be a tool, a useful reference for other universities not now involved in CALOHEA, but they are developing programs in relation to one of these three subject area, in order to see, well, what are the reference, at least at the regional level in relation to these subject areas, to this recognition mechanism allow to establish equivalence between qualifications offered in different countries, in particular in these 7 countries involved in CALOHEA. Express also specialization of particular programs in terms of the subdimension address. The key elements are the dimension, but each of the institutions identify some particular or specialized subdimensions. So this is another element that enrich the discussion. But also these results allows to compare the level of achievement aim for each of the subdimensions as we develop descriptors for each of the dimension and subdimensions. This gives a comparability element for the different institutions and the different countries, and also allows to compare shorter periods of study as well as periods of study during which only particular types of knowledge, specific skills, or capacity to perform particular responsibility can be developed. So from our perspective, this is a very useful element for recognition, comparability, and transparency. And we consider, as my colleagues we will share during these 2 days, and a very, very useful product for the institutions in order to readapt and to adjust and to adequate the programs in line with the regional and the international discussions. At the end, this is part of the picture of the results. In here, it's a graphic with summarize the first in one particular case, which are the focus of the subdimensions development in one particular program in comparison with the second program. All of them has the same dimensions, but they are focusing on different subdimensions, specialized in different subdimensions. So this framework gives this opportunity for comparability at regional scale. In terms of the second mechanism that is related to the credits and related to the student workload, as recognition is the core of CALOHEA, as we have discussed what will be recognized in terms of these discussions of a framework of a specific descriptor for knowledge, skills, and responsibilities or competence. The second aspect to be included in our discussion is how much is to be recognized. And here we have two elements for as a starting point. We have the perspective of the input of how much is to be recognized, and this perspective from the input is the perspective from the teacher. It's a teacher-centered approach. But we also have the perspective from the student-centered approach, and this perspective is from the output. And as for the core of the project is the learning outcomes in terms of what will be recognized and not the content, in terms of the time and how much is to be recognized in terms of the time spent to achieve these learning outcomes. Here, the perspective again is the student perspective. So it's an output perspective. It's the perspective from how much our students spend in the learning process to achieve the different learning outcomes. So for this, to discuss this second recognition mechanism that is linked to the installment of this culture of student workload measurement in our institutions, there are different steps that we follow. Here, as the first recognition mechanism related to the qualification, the subject-specific qualification framework, this is also already done, already finished. There are some aspects that we are still discussing in CALOHEA, but it's this second recognition mechanism is has been developed during these 2 years in parallel with the recognition mechanism number 1. So there are 3 phases or 3 aspects that I think it's important to share with this broader audience to try to summarize and to try to land this discussion in beyond the project. That is, the first point is, why do recognition and internationalization require us to make the full student workload explicit? What tools we must use to make this full student workload more explicit or explicit? And how to make estimating and monitoring full student workload part of our institutional culture, an integral part of our curriculum design and revision process. So how we can put this in the center of the curriculum design. And our starting point is that in many of the institutions involved in CALOHEA, but also in outside the project in the region, but also all over the world, the input or the teacher-centered approach, it's the paradigm. And for this approach, when you revise or when you try to see what is happening in a particular degree program in a semester or in an academic year, what we take into consideration are the contact hours, because it is aligned with this teacher-centered approach. And in this case, as you can see here in this slide, in a daily program, in a weekly program of 1 semester, we have different courses, and what we are very clear is the contact hours per week for each of the courses during this semester or this academic year. So, but what is behind these contact hours? There is something else. This is not enough. These contact hours, in some cases, are enough to achieve the learning outcomes, to complete this learning process in relation to these subjects, and in other cases, they are something else. So what is behind these contact hours? And this is relevant for the recognition and the transparency, again, process. We have to try to identify different activities that from the different subjects we propose to our students that are linked to the readings that we suggest, the different assignments that we propose to our students, the different fieldworks or laboratory work, not supervised, because the supervised fieldwork and laboratory are in the contact hours, the preparation of the examination. There is an amount of time that is not identified in the contact hours, but it's necessary to achieve these learning outcomes as a result of the learning process. So if we put next to the contact hours and we try the independent work hours, these hours that are also necessary to achieve the learning outcomes, probably the full picture will be completely different. Instead of these 17 hours per week for the student work, we are moving to 43 hours per week in terms of the whole student workload. And this is the picture of the student-centered approach in terms of what we are going, how much we are going to recognize, not only what we are going to recognize, how much we are going to recognize. For this, we need to try to measure, because in some cases, what we identified in the institutions involved in CALOHEA is that the universities, this culture of student workload measurement was not installed. So we need to install this culture of student workload measurement. So we need to try to identify this contact hour plus the independent work. For that purpose, we apply different tools. During this project lifetime, we started with a desk estimation, where the academics in the different programs involved in CALOHEA, civil engineering programs, teacher education programs, and medicine program, try to identify, the academics try to reflect on how much time it is necessary in the different components of the curriculum, in the different subjects, to achieve the result expected in these different components. We combine this test estimation with some questionnaires that the universities apply with students and academics at the end of a concrete semester chosen, to try to contrast, to compare the result of this estimation from the academic perspective as a theoretical estimation with some real data collected from some students and some academics who applied in a concrete semester. And this is also combined in a second round of tools with logbooks in particular weeks, where we collect some information in different subjects from the student perspective, and also with some focus group. So we are finishing this process in the coming month with the application of the 4 tools. That it's not only to collect data and to try to identify what is the time behind the learning outcomes that we expect in the different programs, but also the use and the application of these tools, of these different tools. It's part of the installment of this culture of student workload measurement. So with this, we are trying, we have 2 different targets with this second recognition mechanism. We have one at the program, at the individual and the program level, but we have also one for the whole project and also for the region in general. In terms of the individuals involved in this discussion, and also the programs and the universities that are part of this process in the discussion, the idea is we are trying to engage different stakeholders in revising and reflecting in the different higher education program, the different subjects, the different courses, based on the data collected through the different tools. So we are collecting data, we are identifying, and we are adapting and adjusting different formats that we propose to collect this information. We are discussing the data internally in the different programs that are part of the CALOHEA, but also in the framework of the project. And we are trying to reflect how to enhance the curricula with this data, to try to incorporate this information that is not by hand, it's not transparent, at least in many institutions, how we are incorporating this information in the curriculum designed or redesigned. And for the project in general and for the region, the idea is at the end, this contribute to a regional discussion and to try to be more coherent as a system, national system, but also regional system in terms of the workload, which is behind each of the degree programs. So all these discussions in the different subject area groups at national level, in these national dissemination meetings, that this will be part of the points to be shared and to be discussed with all of you, virtually and physically, will allow us to have some recommendations for the region and to prepare some kind of guidelines of the installment of this culture of student workload measurement at the regional level, that it will be completely linked with the credit systems that are available in the region, are in some cases at national level. The third recognition mechanism, that is number 3, that is the implementation of authentic assessment. It will be, it's a more concrete aspect of this recognition of this transparency and this internationalization process that is behind CALOHEA. But of course, again, we are in the framework and in the paradigm of a student-centered approach. So in this framework, it is important to include a more authentic or a real authentic assessment that implies real life context, imply real world tasks and activities as part of the assessment that we propose to our students in the different courses, in the different subjects, a more realistic and simulated situation, and it's based on performance standards. This is very, in some cases, it's completely new. In some areas, it's completely new. So we started with this recognition mechanism number 3 in the last month, I think in the last 6 months, trying to follow these 3 phases. The first point is to try to make a diagnostic of the current assessment practice of learning outcomes in the universities involved in the project. The second part that is now under construction is the development of action plans to move forward to full implementation of this authentic assessment strategy, mechanisms of program learning outcomes, and then to have some inspirational examples at the end of the project of authentic assessment of learning outcomes can be shared with the broader academic community in the different subject areas. So this is what we propose with these 3, with the combination of these 3 recognition mechanisms, to have more transparent, more internationalized, and more recognized degree programs in Southeast Asia region, but also in this internal discussion, in this regional discussion, but also in the discussion that is beyond the region. So we consider that developing these 3 recognition mechanisms, we will be ready for a regional discussion, but also a more global discussion of how to make more internationalized, more comparable, more recognized our degree programs. The last aspect in the project is that there is a community, academic community, a CALOHEA community involved in these discussions. When we finish, we will be 3 years at least in the framework of CALOHEA, but 6 years in the framework of tuning and CALOHEA process, with people who are more familiar with this recognition mechanism, people, academics who will be able to share, to introduce others, colleagues in these discussions. So the idea is that at the end, we will have this network of champions of internationalizations who can share, who can give this framework to others in their institutions, but in other institutions who have not participated in this CALOHEA project. These are the different steps that we are moving forward in terms of this network of champions of internationalizations are our starting point and our goal at the end for each of the recognition mechanisms. And when we prepare this presentation, we consider that it's important to share with all of you which will be the result in terms of the people who will be prepared. We will be well prepared to continue to move forward in the future when the project finalizes with this recognition mechanism for the country and for the region in general. So at the end, we expect to have this idea of well-prepared academics as a network for Thailand, but also a network in Southeast Asia region. In terms, and very, very brief, because I would like to finish and to open the floor and the space, the virtual space for comments or for questions or clarification. A few slides in relation to how this project, CALOHEA, is connected with other initiatives at the global scale. In terms of now, all of us now are more familiarized with this language of the recognition mechanisms. We put with Emilien this comparative from CALOHEA with other projects from the point of view of these three recognition mechanisms. In terms of the creation of this regional subject-specific qualification framework, there are projects like Tuning in Europe, which develop this framework for many subject areas: civil engineering, history, nursing, physics, teacher education, ICT, medicine, international relations, art, business administration, more than 20 subject areas with a framework, which gives this idea of key dimension at some dimension. In Latin America, there is a project that is also running now that is called ACE, Aprendizaje Centrado en el Estudiante. It's learning, student-centered learning, with many countries in Latin America involved, but also developing framework for education, history, nursing, and environmental engineering that are also working with the same structure that I show. In terms of the second recognition mechanism, the culture of the workload, installment, and the credits, and this discussion about how much time is behind it's required to achieve the learning outcomes. Of course, Europe developed ECTS. Tuning contribute to these discussions since 2000 and improve the guidelines of the ECTS, including not only the time, but also the link with the learning outcomes. So there is a link very clearly identified in this development. But also for Latin America, there is a credit system developed in the framework of a similar project like Tuning America Latina. But the same for Africa. Tuning Africa developed an ACTS, that is the African Credit Transfer System. In the three cases, as a starting point, in trying to set up this culture of measurement of the student workload, and then trying to identify which is the time behind the learning outcomes. And of course, this is completely linked with the learning outcomes, the authentic assessment of international comparable learning outcomes. And here again, there is a CALOHEA project. It's similar to the CALOHEA, that is the framework of this session, but with European universities involved. My colleague here, Emilien, is part also from this project. But we have a similar discussion in Latin America and in Africa, linked here again with recognition mechanism number 2. So it's a global discussion. The tools are similar, of course. They are adapt it and adjust it to the different contexts, but we are promoting the same language to try to have a more comparable system at the global level in terms of these recognition mechanisms. That's why in these different contexts we are promoting similar tools. So what we are going to see in the coming sessions is what are the concrete results for civil engineering and teacher education in particular in the framework of CALOHEA. So thank you very much for your time and your patience. My colleagues here, the members of CALOHEA, this is very it's repeated, but we need to introduce other academics, other stakeholders to this discussion. That's why it's necessary to try to set up the milestones of CALOHEA and tuning in this discussion. So thank you very much. It's Kokunmak. Okay, thank you very much.